There's a strip of water so narrow you could nearly hold it in your palm on a map. 33 kilometers at its tightest point. 33 kilometers between the Gulf and the rest of the world. 33 kilometers that carry the blood of the modern economy. 20 million barrels of oil every single day. And on one side of this strip sits a country most people have never truly thought about. A country that has stayed quiet while empires argued around it. A country that has shaken hands with enemies, whispered to rivals, and kept its doors open when everyone else was slamming theirs shut. That country is Oman, and right now the geography beneath its feet is turning into the most dangerous pressure point on Earth. Before we go any further, understand this. What you're about to hear is not speculation. This is not a theory. The events unfolding around this stretch of water are real. They are happening right now. They will affect every single country on this planet, including yours. The price of the fuel in your car, the cost of the food on your table, the warmth in your home this winter, all of it runs through 33 kilometers of water that one nation could, at any moment, decide to close. And the only thing standing quietly between chaos and calm is Oman. So let us go back to the beginning. Let us talk about what this place actually is, where it sits, and why, of all the places on Earth, this tiny strip of ocean became the single most consequential piece of geography in modern history. The Strait of Hormuz sits at the mouth of the Persian Gulf, nestled between two coastlines that could not be more different from each other. To the north, Iran. To the south, Oman and the United Arab Emirates. The strait connects the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman, which then opens into the vast Arabian Sea. It is, in the most literal sense, the only door in and out of the Gulf. There is no back entrance. There is no side road. If you want to move oil, gas, or cargo out of the Gulf and into the world, you go through Hormuz. Full stop. Now, here is what makes this place so fragile. The navigable channels through the strait, the actual lanes where massive oil tankers can safely travel, are only 2 miles wide, 2 miles in each direction. One lane going in, one lane going out, separated by a 2-mile buffer zone. Imagine a 6-lane highway that feeds an entire continent. And then imagine that highway narrowing down to a single road through a mountain pass. That is Hormuz. Thousands of ships funnel themselves through those narrow lanes every single month, carrying energy that powers factories, hospitals, homes, and entire national economies. And both of those shipping lanes pass directly through Iranian and Omani territorial waters. Both nations technically own the road. That detail, that single geographic fact, is the reason this region keeps the world awake at night. Now let us talk about what actually flows through this strait, because the numbers are staggering in a way that is almost hard to believe until you see them laid out. In 2024, an average of 20 million barrels of oil passed through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. 20 million barrels. To put that in context, that is roughly 20% of all the petroleum liquids consumed anywhere on Earth in a single day. More than 1/4 of the entire world's seaborne oil trade squeezes through that 33-kilometer gap. Every ship, every tanker, every cargo vessel carrying crude oil from Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, all of it passes through Oman's front yard. But oil is only part of the story. Natural gas is the other half, and the numbers there are just as striking. Approximately 22% of the world's entire liquefied natural gas exports pass through Hormuz, most of it coming from Qatar, one of the single largest LNG producers on the planet. The countries on the receiving end of that gas include Germany, Italy, France, Japan, South Korea, countries that heat millions of homes and run entire industrial sectors on Qatari gas shipped through this strait. If the water closes, the gas stops, and the cold comes. When you add it all together, the crude oil, the petroleum products, the liquefied natural gas, what you're looking at is a waterway moving somewhere in the range of $500 billion worth of energy every single year. $500 billion. Through 33 kilometers of water. Controlled, in practical terms, by 2 countries, one of which has threatened to close it dozens of times, and one of which has quietly built one of the most sophisticated diplomatic positions in the modern world. The country that has threatened to close it is Iran. The country that has built that diplomatic position is Oman. And the tension between those two realities is what makes this story so extraordinary. Let us talk about Iran first, because you cannot understand Hormuz without understanding Iran's relationship with it. Iran sits along the entire northern shore of the strait. Its coastline runs directly alongside those 2-mile shipping lanes. Its military installations look down onto every tanker that passes through. Iran's navy patrols these waters daily. Its fast attack boats, its submarines, its anti-ship missile systems, all of them are positioned within reach of the strait. Iran does not just live near Hormuz. Iran owns the northern wall of it. And Iran has known for decades that Hormuz is its greatest lever against the world. Whenever the United States has imposed sanctions, whenever Israel has escalated tensions, whenever the international community has pushed back against Iran's nuclear program, Tehran has pulled out the same card. Close the strait. Strangle the oil supply. Make the whole world feel the pain. Iranian officials have made this threat so many times that analysts began to wonder if it was just talk. Then came June 2025, and the world stopped wondering. In the early hours of June 22nd, 2025, the United States launched what would be called Operation Midnight Hammer. American aircraft struck multiple Iranian nuclear facilities in a coordinated attack designed to significantly degrade, and in some cases destroy, Iran's nuclear program. The strikes were precise. The damage was real. And the reaction in Tehran was immediate and volcanic. Iran's parliament voted to authorize the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Ships began rerouting. Tanker captains started getting nervous. Oil markets lurched, and the world held its breath. The fact that oil prices actually fell back below $70 a barrel within days of the strikes told you something important about how markets read the situation. Traders were betting that Iran would not actually follow through, that the parliamentary vote was political theater, that the Supreme National Security Council would pull back from the edge. And in June 2025, they were right. The strait stayed open. But the parliamentary vote, the formal legal authorization to close the world's most important waterway, that authorization did not go away. It sits there still, waiting, like a loaded weapon on a table that nobody wants to touch but nobody's willing to move. And then came February 2026, and the situation got tighter still. In February of 2026, Iran conducted live-fire military drills directly inside the Strait of Hormuz. Not near it, not adjacent to it, inside it. Sections of the strait were temporarily closed to shipping during those drills. Tankers sat waiting. Cargo was delayed. And in Washington, the response was swift and unmistakable. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the largest warship in the world, a nuclear-powered supercarrier that is essentially a floating city, was ordered to the Gulf. It joined one of the largest American military buildups in the region since the invasion of Iraq in 2003. Dozens of warships, fighter jets, Marines, and intelligence assets poured into the region. The message from Washington was direct and unambiguous. We will keep the strait open by force if necessary. So you now have two nuclear-capable powers, the United States and Iran, facing each other directly across the world's most important choke point. You have a parliamentary vote authorizing closure. You have live-fire drills inside the strait. You have the world's biggest warship steaming toward the Gulf. And you have 20 million barrels of oil trying to get through that gap every single day. The question that nobody can fully answer is, what happens next? And the answer to that question runs directly through the third country in this equation. The country that has said almost nothing publicly, but has been doing almost everything privately. The country whose geography and whose diplomacy might be the only thing holding the situation together. Oman. Oman's position in this story is so unique that it almost defies easy explanation. Start with the geography. Oman sits on the southeastern tip of the Arabian Peninsula. Its northern territory, a small peninsula called the Musandam, separated from the rest of Oman by a strip of UAE land, juts directly into the Strait of Hormuz, like a finger pointing at Iran. Omani territory physically forms the southern wall of the strait. Omani coastline, Omani waters, Omani fishing villages, these are the things you see on one side as your tanker passes through. Iran is the thing you see on the other. This means that any military action in the strait, any mining of the shipping lanes, any naval confrontation, any attempt to physically close or disrupt the passage, happens in Oman's living room. Oman cannot be a bystander in a Hormuz crisis. Its ports, its shipping industry, its fishermen, its coastline, all of it is directly exposed. And yet Oman has spent decades building something that no other Gulf nation has managed to build. A relationship of genuine trust with Iran on one side, and genuine cooperation with the United States and the United Kingdom on the other side, simultaneously. This is not a small thing. This is, in the world of geopolitics, an almost miraculous thing. While Saudi Arabia and Iran have traded proxy wars across the region, while the UAE and Qatar have feuded publicly, while Israel and Iran have launched missiles at each other's territory, while the entire region has split into camps, Oman has sat quietly in the middle and talked to everyone. Sultans have flown to Tehran when no one else would. Omani officials have hosted American diplomats when back-channel talks were the only talks happening. The nuclear deal negotiations that eventually produced the JCPOA, the 2015 Iran nuclear agreement, those early conversations happened in Muscat, in Oman's capital. Because Oman was the only country both sides trusted enough to use as a meeting ground. In the autumn of 2025, as tensions were building again, Oman's foreign minister Badr al-Busaidi stood at a major security conference in Bahrain and said something that stopped the room. He said that the Gulf Cooperation Council had, for too long, allowed Iran to be isolated. He said that this needed to change. and that it needed to change now. This was not a small statement. This was the foreign minister of one of the GCC's own member states standing up and saying the strategy of isolating Iran had failed, and that Oman was willing to be the bridge to something different. That is not the kind of statement you make unless you have been watching something unfold up close and you believe it is heading somewhere dangerous. And here's the thing about Oman that makes this all even more remarkable. Oman is not neutral in the way that, say, Switzerland is neutral, sitting far from the conflict, protected by mountains and distance. Oman is neutral, while its entire northern coastline is the southern wall of the world's most contested waterway. Oman is neutral, while hosting British and American military facilities on its soil. Oman is neutral while maintaining active diplomatic relations with Iran. Oman is neutral while every one of its neighbors is choosing a side. This kind of neutrality takes extraordinary skill. It takes generational consistency. And it has made Oman, in the quiet estimation of every major intelligence service and foreign ministry in the world, the single most important small nation in the Middle East. Scholars who study Oman's foreign policy have started calling it niche diplomacy, the art of finding the one narrow role in a complex situation that only you can fill, and filling it so well that everyone needs you. Oman has found that niche and built an entire national identity around it. And right now, with the Strait of Hormuz closer to being closed than it has been in modern history, that niche has become absolutely indispensable. But let us be clear about something, because this story cannot be told honestly without also telling you what is at stake if Oman's careful balancing act falls apart. What happens to the world if the Strait of Hormuz actually closes? Not as a drill, not as a warning, but actually physically for weeks or months. The answer is unlike anything the modern global economy has experienced since the Arab oil embargo of 1973. And even that comparison does not fully capture the scale of what a Hormuz closure would mean today. Start with oil prices. Goldman Sachs analysts have stated clearly that a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz would push oil above $100 a barrel. Some models suggest significantly higher than that, depending on how long the closure lasted and whether violence escalated in the region. Every dollar increase in the price of a barrel of oil ripples through the global economy within weeks. Fuel costs go up. Shipping costs go up. Every product that needs to be manufactured, transported, heated, or refrigerated gets more expensive. Inflation, which the world has spent the last several years fighting down from historic highs, would return with force. But the oil price is only the most visible effect. The deeper damages in the supply chain, the countries most directly exposed to a Hormuz closure, are in Asia. China sources around 5.4 million barrels of oil per day through the strait. India draws 2.1 million barrels. South Korea, one of the world's most industrialized nations, takes 1.7 million barrels per day through Hormuz. Japan, a country with almost no domestic energy resources, depends on the strait for the overwhelming majority of its imported oil. If Hormuz closes for even 2 weeks, these are not inconveniences. These are national crises. Factories shut down, power grids strain. Governments begin making emergency decisions about allocation and rationing. The social and political consequences of that kind of energy shock can last for years. And Europe is not insulated either. Qatar's liquefied natural gas, which has become increasingly important to European energy security since the Russia-Ukraine war disrupted Russian gas supplies, moves through Hormuz. A closure that stops LNG tankers cuts into European heating and electricity generation at the exact moment when European governments have been betting heavily on Qatari gas as a long-term alternative to Russian supply. Now you might ask, what about alternative routes? Can't the oil just go around? And can't the world simply produce oil from somewhere else if the Gulf supply is disrupted? These are reasonable questions. They are also questions that the world's energy analysts, shipping companies, and government planners have spent years trying to answer. And the honest answer, every single time, is deeply uncomfortable. The world is not built to absorb a Hormuz disruption. Not even close. The oil market is a precision system, built on the assumption that supply flows predictably, that tankers arrive on schedule, that the lanes stay open. The entire architecture of global energy pricing, strategic reserves, and refinery operations is calibrated around the continuous flow through Hormuz. When that flow hiccups, even slightly, the effects are immediate. When the Houthi attacks on Red Sea and shipping began in late 2023 and early 2024, just the threat of disruption to that alternate route added billions of dollars in rerouting costs to global trade. And the Red Sea disruption was a fraction of what a Hormuz closure would mean. A fraction. So now you might ask, what about alternative routes? Can't the oil just go around? The short answer is, not nearly enough of it. Saudi Arabia has a pipeline, the East-West crude pipeline, that carries oil from the eastern Gulf Coast across the country to the Red Sea port of Yanbu, bypassing the strait entirely. The UAE has a pipeline that carries crude from Abu Dhabi across the peninsula to the Gulf of Oman, also bypassing the strait. Combined, the available capacity through these two bypass routes is approximately 2.6 million barrels per day. That sounds significant until you remember that 20 million barrels per day flow through the strait. 2.6 million versus 20 million. The bypass routes cover about 13% of normal flow at maximum capacity, assuming everything operates perfectly. The other 87% has nowhere to go. There's also the question of where Iran's oil goes in a closure scenario. Iran itself exports roughly 1.7 million barrels per day, approximately 90% of which goes to China, and all of it passes through the strait. A closure is, in that sense, also a weapon Iran would be using against itself, against its own revenue stream, against its own most important customer. That is one of the key reasons serious analysts have always questioned whether Iran would ever truly follow through. The economic self-destruction involved in closing the strait is real and significant, but so is the leverage it creates. And in a regime that has shown repeatedly that it is willing to absorb enormous economic pain in pursuit of political objectives, the threat cannot be dismissed simply because it is costly. This is the paradox at the center of the Hormuz question. The strait is too important for anyone to close, and yet it is also so important that threatening to close it is the most powerful card any regional actor can play. Iran knows this. It has known it for 40 years, and the rest of the world, the oil consumers, the shipping companies, the national navies, the diplomats, they all know that Iran knows it, which brings us back, one final time, to Oman, and to why the geography of this small country matters now more than ever before. There's a concept in international relations that describes the shared responsibility two nations can develop over a waterway that they both border. Oman and Iran are what some scholars have called the joint custodians of the Strait of Hormuz. Not because they have a formal agreement, they do not, but because geography has placed them both at the gate, and because both countries have, at various points, behaved as if they understood that the gate must remain open for both their interests to survive. Oman has used that shared custodianship quietly but consistently as a foundation for keeping the relationship with Iran functional, even as the rest of the region's relationship with Tehran has collapsed. The military arrangements Oman maintains with Britain and the United States are real. The British have access to Omani ports and facilities. American forces have used Oman as a staging ground and intelligence post, but unlike other Gulf states that host American bases, Oman has never turned those arrangements into public alliances against Iran. It has maintained the posture of a neighbor rather than an adversary, and Iran, for all its hostility toward American influence in the region, has consistently treated Oman differently. When Iranian leaders have wanted a back channel to Washington, they have used Muscat. When American officials have needed a message delivered to Tehran, they have flown to Oman. This is not accidental. It is the result of decades of careful, deliberate, unglamorous diplomatic work. And here is what makes this moment so different from all the previous moments of tension. Iran's threat to close the strait is not new. Iran first threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz during the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s, when the two nations were trading missile attacks on each other's oil tankers in what became known as the Tanker War. The United States sent warships to escort tankers through the Gulf. There were naval skirmishes. Iranian mines blew holes in American warships, and yet the strait never closed. In 2011 and 2012, as international sanctions squeezed Iran's economy, Tehran threatened closure again. In 2018, after the United States withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal and reimposed sanctions, the threats returned. And again in 2019, after the U.S. killed General Qasem Soleimani, the word Hormuz was on every front page in the world, each time the world braced. Each time the strait stayed open. But something is genuinely different about 2025 and 2026. In every previous episode, Iran was threatening in response to economic pressure. The calculation was always the same. If you hurt our economy, we will hurt yours. But what changed in June 2025 was that the United States did not just impose sanctions. It launched direct military strikes on Iranian soil. It struck nuclear facilities. That is not an economic threat. That is an act of war by any traditional definition. And when states respond to acts of war, the calculus changes. The cost-benefit analysis that kept Iran from following through during previous crises may not hold in exactly the same way against a country that has just had its most strategically precious infrastructure destroyed from the air. Iran is not suicidal. Its leaders are calculating, ideological, and deeply invested in the survival of the Islamic Republic. Closing the Strait of Hormuz would immediately cut off 90% of Iran's own oil export revenue. It would trigger an international military response of extraordinary scale. It would hand the United States and its allies a justification for action that even China and Russia would struggle to publicly oppose. Iran knows all of this. Its strategists have wargamed every version of this scenario. They understand what closure costs. And yet, the parliamentary authorization sits there, recorded and active like a sword hanging over the water. Now here is the part of this story that most people miss. Oman's role as a mediator is not just about goodwill or historical relationships. It is, at its core, driven by survival. Oman is a mid-sized economy with significant oil revenues, a long coastline, a small military, and neighbors that are all either larger, richer, or more aggressive than it is. Saudi Arabia to the northwest, the UAE to the north, Yemen to the west, a fractured, conflict-ridden state that has created refugee flows and security threats for years, and Iran across the water to the north. Oman cannot win a military confrontation with any of these actors. It cannot outspend them. It cannot outcurry favor by offering the largest arms deals or the biggest bases. What Oman can do, and what it has done, is make itself necessary. Make itself the one party that everyone trusts, just enough to talk through. Make itself the room where deals can be whispered before they are announced. In a region defined by mistrust, Oman has branded itself as trust. And that brand, that particular, fragile, carefully maintained reputation, is now being tested at a scale it has never faced before. Because what is happening in 2026 is not a single crisis. It is the convergence of multiple crises pressing down on the same geography at the same time. You have the Iran nuclear question, which was not resolved by the June 2025 strikes, only transformed. You have the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, which has inflamed public opinion across the Arab world and raised the cost of any government being seen as too close to the West or to Israel. You have the Houthi operations in the Red Sea, which have already disrupted one major global shipping lane and shown that non-state actors with Iranian backing can hold global commerce hostage. You have the American military buildup in the Gulf, which Iran reads as preparation for another strike. And you have the Strait of Hormuz, still open, still flowing, but more vulnerable than it has been in a generation. Every one of these pressures intersects with Omani geography. Every one of them threatens to pull Oman off its careful neutral line. And every one of them makes Oman's continued ability to communicate across these divides more valuable and more fragile at the same time. The world's response to this situation has been, in many ways, to watch and wait. Markets have not yet priced in a full closure. Shipping companies have not yet rerouted their tanker fleets permanently. Governments have issued warnings and positioned assets, but have not yet made the kind of public commitments that would signal they believe a closure is imminent. This waiting posture is both understandable and dangerous. Understandable because genuine crises in the region have been predicted before and have not materialized. Dangerous because the factors driving this particular escalation are more structural, more compounding, and more deeply rooted than most previous episodes. The geography has not changed. The strait is still 33 kilometers wide. The oil still has nowhere else to go. Iran still sits along the northern shore, and Oman still stands quietly at the gate on the southern side. But the politics have changed. The military situation has changed. The level of trust between Washington and Tehran, between Tehran and the Gulf states, between the region and the idea of a negotiated solution, has eroded in ways that will not be quickly repaired. What happens next depends, more than most people realize, on the choices of a small, quiet sultanate on the southeastern tip of the Arabian Peninsula. It depends on whether Oman can continue to hold conversations that no one else can hold, on whether its geography, which has made it both exposed and essential, continues to work in its favor rather than against it, on whether the careful reputation built over decades survives the pressure of a region that is, by any honest measure, closer to a major conflict today than it has been in years. The Strait of Hormuz is 33 kilometers wide. It is the thinnest seam holding the global economy together. And Oman is the nation whose feet are planted on one side of that seam, close enough to the fire to feel the heat, experienced enough to know that the only way through is not through force, but through the patient, persistent, often invisible work of keeping every door open, every phone line active, and every conversation alive. The world does not talk about Oman the way it talks about Saudi Arabia or Iran or Israel. It does not appear in the headlines the way it should. But in the quiet rooms, where the most consequential conversations in the Middle East are happening right now, the ones that will determine whether 20 million barrels of oil continue to flow tomorrow morning, Oman is almost certainly in the room. Consider what the world looked like from Muscat right now in February of 2026. To the north across the water, Iranian warships and live-fire drills in the Strait. To the west, the American supercarrier moving through the Arabian Sea toward the Gulf. Somewhere in between, a parliamentary resolution sitting in Tehran like an ember waiting for oxygen, and threading through all of it, oil tankers, thousands of them, moving through lanes 2 miles wide, carrying the energy that keeps the modern world alive, crewed by sailors from the Philippines and India and Bangladesh and Ukraine who did not sign up to transit a war zone, but who may find themselves doing exactly that if the wrong decision is made in the wrong capital on the wrong morning. This is the reality of what geography created in the Persian Gulf. It concentrated the world's most essential resource in the most politically volatile neighborhood on Earth, and gave it only one exit. And it placed at the corner of that exit a small nation, Oman, that somehow, through patience and wisdom and a kind of strategic humility that larger nations rarely manage, made itself into the hinge of the whole situation, not through power, not through wealth, through trust, through the slow, patient accumulation of a credibility built one quiet conversation at a time over decades, across divides that seemed unbridgeable to everyone else. The question is whether the room holds, whether the table holds, whether the voices around it are willing to hear each other before the geography beneath all of them decides the outcome instead. Look at the military hardware that has gathered in this region in just the past 8 months. The USS Gerald R. Ford and its carrier strike group, which includes destroyers, cruisers, submarines, and support ships, represents more combined firepower than the entire military of most nations. Alongside it, the United States has positioned additional destroyer squadrons, land-based air power, and intelligence-gathering assets across bases in Qatar, Bahrain, and the UAE. On the Iranian side, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy has been running aggressive patrol operations in the Strait and the wider Gulf for months. They have deployed fast attack boats that can operate in swarms, difficult to track and difficult to intercept. They have positioned anti-ship missiles along their coastline. They have practiced mining operations. The gap between posturing and the first accidental exchange of fire has never felt narrower than it does right now. And yet, the oil still flows. Every morning, approximately 55 fully loaded supertankers navigate those 2-mile shipping lanes. Every morning, sailors and captains and shipping company executives make the calculation that the risk is acceptable. Every morning, the global economy wakes up and receives its energy supply as though nothing unusual is happening on the other side of the world. That normalcy is, in itself, one of the most remarkable things about this situation. It reflects the degree to which the international system, imperfect and fragile as it is, still functions, still finds a way to keep the essential machinery running, even when the political and military environment around it is deteriorating rapidly. But normalcy is not the same as safety. And the history of the Strait of Hormuz is, in the end, the history of a world that keeps gambling that the worst will not happen, and has been right so far. The question of 2026 is whether that streak continues, because geography, in the end, does not wait for diplomacy. Geography does not care about negotiations or ceasefires or carefully worded statements. Geography simply is. The strait is where it is. The oil is where it is. The armies and navies and fleets are where they are. And the world is watching, whether it knows it or not, to see if 33 kilometers of water remains the world's busiest road or becomes the world's most dangerous wall. Oman is standing at that wall right now, quietly, carefully, with one hand extended to each side, and everything, quite literally, depends on what happens next.